Welcome to the Philanos 2022 PowerUp Gathering and Awards Celebration. I am Maggie Glasgow, Chair-elect of Philanos, filling in for our chair, Susan Benford, who's attending the Exponent Philanthropy Conference in Minneapolis. First up, we have some breaking news. Save the date. Philanos will be hosting an in-person national conference in Baltimore in 2023. Dates are November 5 through 7, details to come soon. We have a terrific afternoon of programming and celebration ahead, so let's dive in. We have 3 separate sessions of programming for you, so think of this gathering as a trifecta. First, we'll consider the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in trust-based philanthropy. Second, we'll have an extended conversation with our speakers. And third, we'll have a celebration. We will start with presentations by nationally known speakers Kaci, Patterson, and Infante. After a 10-minute break, we'll bring our speakers back for a moderated conversation with Philanos board member Deepika Andavarapu. Deepika will also make time to ask the speakers your questions. And speaking of questions, you can find the Q&A button in your Zoom toolbar and add your questions there at any time in the first or second session. Use the chat button to share comments. In fact, go into chat and post the first word or thought that comes to your mind when you hear trust-based philanthropy. After we finish our conversation in the 2 p.m. hour, we'll have a second 10-minute break and then resume at 3 p.m. Eastern, where we will celebrate you, our affiliates, and the women who do this work with our 2022 Spotlight and Willoughby Awards presentation. Your Zoom link is good for the next 3 hours. You can easily sign back in if you get disconnected, or just stay connected the entire time and enjoy our slideshows during our 2 breaks. Up now is the first of our speakers, Kaci Patterson, founder and chief architect of the Black Equity Collective. She's also been the chief strategist of the Black Equity Initiative, a racial justice enterprise she designed in 2017. Kaci brings over 20 years of experience in the nonprofit and philanthropic sectors to her consulting practice, Social Good Solutions, where she offers capacity building, education advocacy, and social justice initiatives for civil society leaders and public officials worldwide. Kaci is a certified mediator, a graduate of Pepperdine, and holds an MBA in organizational management and leadership from the University of Laverne. In the interest of letting you hear more from Kaci and less from me, a bio that highlights her many, many accomplishments is linked in chat. So now let me turn it over to Kaci.
Well, Maggie, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here with you as you celebrate the incredible work that you all have been doing over the past year. And as a fellow Giving Circle founder, I want to just honor, the work and the possibility of Giving Circles. And so I really appreciate being invited to share space with you all this morning and share a little bit about my perspective and my experiences in what I call powering diversity, equity, and inclusion through intentionality. I'm going to walk through a slide deck this morning because I think it's important to be able to share some tangible tools and examples with you all. But before I do that, I'm going to just share a few of my objectives today. First, my goal is to inspire you to think a little bit differently about the challenge of diversity. I want to share some lessons with you from the initiative that I founded and led for 4 years, really as a case study for how you can power diversity, equity, and inclusion through intentionality. And finally, I want to help you to think through how to operationalize intention with a very clear vision. A little bit about me and how I come to this work. I've always had this very unique ability to serve as a bridge builder and to build trust. And to be honest, we need more bridge builders. If you've been following the news out of Los Angeles and what's happening with our LA City Council right now, you see that what we're suffering from in this city, and particularly with the leadership of our council, is the inability to build bridges across difference, the inability to build bridges across diversity, the inability to include and have a more expansive vision of what it means to include everyone in our society. And sectors across the country are really trying to figure out how to identify more bridge builders in their sector, how to grow a sector that is younger, and quite honestly, how to grow a sector that is browner. So today, as I said, I want to offer some of my experiences that I've had in philanthropy, not only in my work as founding and leading a giving circle for the past 8 years, but the many experiences that I've had with funders over the course of my time and my career, really as a way to help probe your thinking. And it's really encouraging you, not through some, if you can see it, you can be it type of motivational speech, but really because these are tangible lessons that will help you to move from rhetoric and what I like to call sort of the intellectualizing of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and put that rhetoric into results. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we're going to walk through a case study. And as I walk through this, I want to just, again, sort of offer my perspective in saying that I didn't have a lot of examples, particularly in 2017, where I could point to and say, there it is. What I'm looking for in terms of the kind of equity in practice, there it is. And so really what I do with funders and what I hope to be able to show you today is how to model. We need to be able to take this again from this intellectual space of understanding the importance of it to really being able to embody what it means to model and live into diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so someone had the bright idea to put me in charge of developing an initiative. And I want to give you a little bit of background around how that initiative came to be before we launch into the case study. In 2017, I was hired by a funder to help them answer a question that I'm sure many of you on this webinar today might be asking. What can we do differently? And how can we break through and get to a different kind of result, a different set of results? Now, to be fair, that wasn't the exact question that they posed to me, but that was the undertone. The exact question that they asked was, what can we do to address the killing of unarmed Black men? They felt like there was something they could do differently as funders, but they didn't know exactly what, and they didn't know exactly how. And they also had a hunch that they probably weren't the best people to answer that question. So I designed and they funded the Black Equity Initiative. And in June of 2021, when the initiative sunset, we evaluated its results and drew 4 really important lessons that I want to share with you about how intentionality was the real success story. Next slide. We needed to anchor and ground our work in a set of principles so that as we were making decisions along the way, we could always refer back to what were the principles that we were anchoring and grounding ourselves in. And these principles were not ones that we came up with as funders. These were principles that were guided and developed by the very organizations that this initiative funded. There were 15 organizations, all of them Black-led and Black-serving. And these organizational leaders spent a year in conversation with each other, grappling through some of the tough questions that they had been dealing with at an organizational level, at a community level, and in some cases at a very individual level. And we spent a year in conversation, building trust with one another, really grappling with some of these tough questions that were being posed in the landscape. And again, this was 2017. This was really pioneering to have an initiative that was focused on the Black population at that time. This is years before the murder of George Floyd. This was well before the pandemic. And so to have an initiative that was uniquely focused on the Black experience was very pioneering. And so they had been in these spaces where their voices had been diluted. They had been in these spaces where they didn't have what they felt like was the freedom, really, to be able to express some of the challenges that they had been grappling with. And so they spent a year answering these questions and developed these principles out of those conversations with one another. And so truth, strength, strategic disruption, and love really became the guiding anchors of our work. So that as we, myself as the initiative manager and the JIB Fund as the sort of financial backing of the initiative, as we were making decisions moving forward over the course of 4 years together, we were making those decisions anchored in these principles, because we knew that in order to really live into and fully embody what it meant to be, sort of diverse, equitable, and inclusive, we knew that we had to honor the work and honor the voice of those that were informing the initiative and those organizational leaders who were living the work on the ground. So we anchored ourselves in principles so that we could have a clear framework to guide our decision-making moving forward. Next slide. So the first lesson, I mentioned that as we evaluated the initiative after 4 years, that the first lesson that we took away was the importance of really centering the Black experience. And what does that really even mean? We often hear that we have to center the experience of those who are most marginalized, or we have to center the experience of those who are quote unquote closest to the problem. But what does it mean to actually center their experience? What it means is that we have to recognize that there are people who are on the outside of what Dr. Powell out of UC Berkeley's Othering and Belonging Institute calls the circle of care. Like, there are people who are on the outside of the circle of care and concern, meaning that we don't often think about how our decisions are going to impact them. And so what it means to center their experience is it means to take those folks who are on the outside of the circle of concern and put them in the middle of our decision-making. And here's a good example of that with respect to the initiative. I mentioned that when the initiative first began, that the funders were really asking a question around how do we use our philanthropy to intervene into the killing of unarmed Black men. And their sort of presumption about how to solve that issue really came from what they saw as needing a sense of belonging. They felt like there was disconnection. They felt like they were seeing people who were in deep isolation, and they wanted to foster a greater sense of belonging through a greater sense of community building. And that was sort of their initial thinking when we went into the design of the initiative. But after spending several months, about 4 months, in deep sort of discovery, in doing literature reviews, in doing interviews with folks who were in community and studying models that really seemed to work around, how are we addressing, some of these issues that are happening at the community level, and studying some of those models and talking to some community leaders on the ground, they actually put forward a very different problem statement. Their problem statement wasn't centered on the lack of belonging at a community level. Their problem statement centered on the lack of belonging at a systemic and structural level. And so you can imagine that that's a very different problem statement. And so had we moved forward with designing the initiative to be one about community building, we would have had a very different set of results than had we designed the initiative to be one about belonging structurally in a society, addressing systemic racism that was impacting Black communities. Those are two very different problem statements. And so for us to be able to listen to and learn from leaders on the ground who were experiencing the harm, that they were able to then inform the direction that we took with the initiative and how we actually approached solving the problem that they identified was the real root cause. Next slide. So we have lots of data that has informed us over the years around how structural inequity shows up, particularly in the nonprofit sector. And more often than not, it shows up in the form of funding. It shows up in who has access to relationships and who has access to dollars and who has access to trust. And so some of this is actually from a slide that we shared in June at our Equity and Justice Symposium, that you can just see that some of these disparities are structural. When you have average revenues of Black-led organizations being 24% lower and unrestricted net assets 76% lower than white-led organizations, this is a structural issue. And so we need to be thinking about how do we define the problem? Because how we define the problem will almost always determine the solution that we pursue. And so what we needed to do in terms of how we designed the initiative was not only to address the problem statement that was identified by the leaders on the ground, but we also needed to look at what were the structural barriers that we as funders were sort of putting in place to make the solving of that problem more difficult. And so looking at the way that we were funding the work was a very important way that we needed to address some of the structural inequity and how we were able to actually get at solving the problem that our organizations identified. Next slide, please. The second lesson was to commit over time. Oftentimes, we sort of live in this psychology sometimes, and you know, our American psychology sometimes sort of puts us in this position of thinking that we should be able to get quick results, that we should be able to invest and see a return on our investment. And sometimes we have a false sense of timing of how long those investments should take. And so I put this up because I wanted to just sort of situate, you know, the presence of time, how long we were in, you know, this sort of period of time in this country where the African slave trade was the primary source of America's economic engine. And how long after the ending of the African slave trade, we existed in an era of Jim Crow, where separate but equal was the law of the land. And that law was coordinated at the highest levels of business, of government, of the social sector, and how long it was happening where structural inequity was really the way in which we lived in this country. And we're not done, it's not over yet. Again, we can look to what's happening here in Los Angeles and see that structural inequity, systemic racism is still very present in our modern day world. And so to fund work and say, we want you to address a very difficult problem statement of how do we actually begin to get at systemic racism where Black people are disproportionately harmed. To fund that work in 1 year is completely doing a disservice to what it actually takes to start to get at the real solutions to those issues. And so committing over time, and in the case of the JIB Fund, they made a 4-year commitment to that work. a 4-year commitment that's now turned into a larger, more expansive initiative that has had ripple effects, not only in Los Angeles, but in other parts of California as well. So that commitment over time is now leading to work that is intended to have more direct permanency and how we actually fund and support Black-led organizations to be able to pursue addressing issues of systemic racism over time and investing in their sustainability as organizations and their ability to do that work from a position of organizational strength. So commitment over time is very important, to be in relationship with organizations so that you are going on a journey with them, so that your funding isn't just one-time funding, but it's partnership funding. Funding that is tied up and really honors the inextricability of your humanity, that says your liberation and my liberation are bound together. And so commitment over time is really a tool of partnership, of deep partnership and trust building. Next slide. The third lesson, matching the investments to the significance of the goal. Again, the JIB Fund in our case funded and invested over $5 million in a 4-year period, funding 15 different organizations over 4 years, investing in facilitated convenings where they came together as organizational leaders 3 times a year. So really trying to invest at a level that could actually begin to get at the issue in a deep and substantive way. And that is very difficult sometimes when we are funding $10,000 here, $25,000 there, and we're trying to make deep structural change. It's very difficult to make deep structural change with $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 gifts. And especially when those gifts are tied, they're not unrestricted gifts. If those gifts are tied to specific outcomes, it makes it very difficult to really match the investment with the significance of the goal, to really tie those things together in a way where you can actually see that we mean business. We want to see a change. And if we want to see a change, we have to be willing to invest at the clip that it takes for change to be possible. So that was the third lesson that we learned. Next slide, please. The fourth lesson, last lesson that we learned is so important, particularly for us as funders, where we are so used to having a say, where our voice carries such huge weight in the room. When we speak, organizations listen. When we call a meeting, organizations attend, because there's a power dynamic at play here with the money and who actually controls the purse strings. And so sometimes we have a tendency as funders to take up a little bit too much air in the room. Sometimes we have a vision that we want to see, but we don't always take the time to really make sure that our vision lines up with the vision of those in community, the vision of those who are actually working on the ground to change the conditions that we are trying to fund to change. And so a really important lesson was to let leaders lead, to really follow the leadership of those on the ground who knew better than we did, who saw conditions in real time. You know, I often say that data lags behind lived experience. By the time we research something and study it and develop a report and market that report, people have been living that truth for a decade. And so we have to be in a position as funders to invite and engage the leadership of those who are working on these issues directly, because their knowledge, their expertise is really what should be guiding our decision making, and really what should be guiding how dollars flow, where they flow, how often they flow. And these are the ways in which we position ourselves as partners to organizations on the ground. We all want to do good work. We are all proud of the work that we are doing, but how much more work could we do? How much better of a job could we be in really powering diversity, equity, and inclusion if we allowed ourselves to be in true partnership with leaders on the ground who are leading and making decisions, life and death, sometimes decisions on the ground every day so that communities can thrive. Next slide. So here's some of my tips for how to move from rhetoric or as I said before, sort of this intellectual space around diversity, equity, and inclusion to operationalizing the same for better results. The first, I would say, is to articulate a clear and a bold 10-year vision that is informed by community. And the reason why I say 10 years is because, again, we have to commit over time. We have to be willing to see that there is a journey to this work, and the change that we really, really seek is never going to be achieved in 1 year. We have to be willing to be bold and audacious and strategically disrupt the conditions of inequity that we are so bogged down by, that we are seeing the pain and suffering, the results of that in the pain and suffering of our neighbors, of our communities, of people who we really care about. We have to be bold and audacious and commit over time. Really look at how to tie that bold and audacious 10-year vision to very specific diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. In other words, are you going to be moving more dollars to organizations that are led by, run by people of color? How can you set up annual targets to say, if we're at 1% now, how do we move to 5% next year and 10% the year after that, so that over 10 years, over half of the dollars that we invest are going to organizations that are led by people of color? That's one way that you can tie the bold, audacious vision to a very specific DEI goal. I'm also a big fan of really looking at who do you need to partner with over time, because none of us can do this alone. None of us have the capacity to overcome the challenges of the world alone. We need to work together. We need to be good collaborators. We need to be good partners. And so really thinking about what is your unique value contribution, your unique value proposition. What can you bring to this work? And where are you sort of out of your league, so to speak, and where you need other partners to sort of step in, lock arms with you, so that together you can achieve this a bigger, bolder, more audacious goal, really around equity and inclusion. This next one is so important. The ability to invest in trust building. There's no way in the world, there's just no way in the world we would have gotten to these 4 principles for Black equity. There's no way that they would have been comfortable with me in being able to share some of the challenges that they had been experiencing in the philanthropic sector and the ways that they were trying to pursue funding and how they felt like their organizations were being locked out of funding. There's just no way they would have been honest with me if there wasn't an investment in trust. And we could not have gotten to the real root causes if people were not in a position where they felt like they could trust me with information, not only to be honest, but to know that their honesty was not going to be used against them, to know that it wasn't going to be punitive if they told me that, you know, we're really struggling with how to write this grant. We really don't understand what you're looking for. Can you talk us through a little bit like what you're actually looking for so that we can be best positioned for this? And my answer was, of course. I scheduled meetings with every single organization that we invited to apply so that I saw their LOIs before the funder saw their LOIs. I helped walk them through, you know, how to talk through their work, how to think through their work before they ever were submitted to the funder for review, to be able to build a sort of trust and camaraderie with them. It is so important to invest in building trust. I know Pia is going to talk to us about trust-based philanthropy, and my contribution to that conversation really lies here. And that is to say that you cannot get to trust-based philanthropy without investing in the relationship it takes to build trust in the first place. And then the last thing is really, really believe in the work that you're doing, because it does get tough. It does get hard. And when it gets tough and hard, what we do in our everyday lives is the same thing we do in philanthropy. We retreat to the familiar. We go back to what is comfortable. We go back to what we know, because we know how to situate ourselves there. When it gets uncomfortable, that's when we have to have the fortitude to stick with it. It is very much like running a marathon. There's a point at which you're training, and there's a point at which you're running miles and miles and miles, where you think to yourself, why the heck am I doing this? You think to yourself, why did I decide to run a marathon? Because your body hurts, your mind is fatigued. There is a point of pain where you don't want to go forward. And it's very easy to give up. And my encouragement to you today is to know that it is worth it. To know that in order for us to really get to the change that we seek collectively, in order to really get to a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive world, we are going to experience pain. And when we experience the pain of breaking down psychological barriers, when we experience the pain of understanding that the way we always did things that might have been good for us were not actually good for the communities on the ground, when we're able to push past the pain, then we know that we're able to really stick with it and move to the finish line. So that's my encouragement for you today, is really believe in the worthiness of what it means to fulfill and embody a sector that is fully diverse, fully equitable, fully inclusive, because it requires a different kind of leadership mindset. So thank you. I look forward to having the conversation with Pia when we get to our moderated panel. Thank you, Maggie, back to you.
Well, thank you, Kaci. Remember, if you have any questions for Kaci, please drop them into Q&A and we'll get to them in the next hour. You can find that Q&A button in your Zoom toolbar. I'm equally excited to present our second speaker, Pia Infante. Those of you who attended our last conference in Seattle will remember Pia speaking to us there. Pia is currently the Senior Fellow at the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project. Prior to this, she was co-executive director of the Whitman Institute, where she helped steward its spend down. Pia brings her chops as a former high school teacher, an organizational development consultant, and nonprofit manager to her work. She serves on the board of MediaJustice.org and the Viralis Center for Arts and Politics. Pia holds an MA in Education from the New School for Social Research and a BA in Rhetoric from the University of California at Berkeley. There is more on her bio that's posted in the chat, and I am pleased to turn it over now to Pia so we can hear from her.
Thank you so much, Maggie. Thank you, everyone. Kaci, I learned so much from you. I had deep respect and was already making deep bows to the Black Equity Initiative, and hearing you draw out the lessons and the framework for it was really powerful. So thank you. I'm also really honored to be here. I'm glad to be back with you. I don't know if some of you remember, but Vu and I had a very spirited conversation about many of these same topics a couple of years ago. So I don't know that I need to say any more about myself. I will say that it was my foundation, the Whitman Institute, that started this party around what now has become, has spread around the sector, trust-based philanthropy. So I think the first and most important thing I want to do is I want to share a brief history of where that phrase came from and how we define it at the project now. So back when the Whitman Institute decided to spend out, we actually did something that's sort of at the center of what Kaci just talked about. We went directly to the partners and stakeholders and community members that we felt the most accountable to, our current and former grantee partners. And we asked them, what should we do with ourselves in our last final 10 years? And what they said to us was, well, we hope that you can advocate for the kind of long-term, Kaci also mentioned this, long-term collaborative partnerships that you've been, holding with us in relationships of mutual learning. We hope that you can promote that in the field. So that is really trust-based philanthropy was born not because, we hired a communications expert or we hired Bridgespan or because we in fact wanted to become donor organizers necessarily. It came from a feeling of deep accountability to the people that we wanted to direct us. We wanted to center their voices, like Kaci was speaking to, because of how deeply we valued equity and racial equity in how we operated. And so from the very beginning, trust-based philanthropy has its roots in many of the things that Kaci just spoke about, but we haven't always talked about it in a racial justice or racial equity framework. And it has become very clear to us over time that they are one and the same. There's the recommendations that Kaci just promoted. They very much feel like the same as what, the same kinds of recommendations for the same reasons and with the same set of values that we started this conversation in the sector. So, so now the trust-based philanthropy sort of movement is being held at the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project. And I put on this slide the purpose of the project, which is a peer-to-peer funder initiative to really reckon and grapple with power itself. We have, as donors, as funders, as giving circle directors, as portfolio managers, in whatever way that we have the influence to shape and design, how this process flows, that is power we are holding. And it is something that I think is embedded in, Kaci, your examples, is being very aware of what it means to have the power to make decisions about resources and to build into the process a way of reckoning with that power, transferring some of that power, acknowledging that that power has been gained in extractive ways, in terms of wealth building in this country. Kaci, you were speaking to structural racism. Structural economic inequity is very real. We live in a country that loves the myth of the self-made man. It's always a white guy most of the time, but, just like a smart or enterprising, white guy, builds a fortune somehow. There's no speaking to how easy it is for that person to get loans. I know in the case of my own foundation, the Whitman Institute, the founder, the initial donor from the 1800s, he helped build the railroad from the center of the country to the Pacific coast. And when I was researching a little bit about how to be reparative, how to be reparative about the way our endowment was created, I found out that this, this man from a Midwestern family got not only a ton of loans and grants to build that railroad, but the federal government actually basically gave his company, huge, vast amounts of land, which is actually indigenous lands that were, taken from tribes and handed them over to this company. So this idea that, the myths that some of these are stories about where the wealth comes from and how it comes into our hands to be given away, I think that is part of the reckoning, around racial justice and around power, is to account for that and articulate that and integrate that into how we behave moving forward. Let me see if I can get our values up here. Sorry, it's a little bit, we do have a set of values that we operate from, and I'm going to actually go to that slide. Oh, there it is. I hope I don't lose it. So in terms of the values underneath, oh no, sorry. I might be doing the controls like too willy-nilly. But anyways, in terms of the values underlying the trust-based philanthropy approach, which I want to define in a second, they may sound familiar because they seem to me to resonate very much with what Kaci presented. But the values underneath our project and the trust-based philanthropy movement itself is that we are working for systemic equity. That is a core value. So what it means is that sometimes trust-based philanthropy is interpreted as giving multi-year unrestricted support, or streamlining our grant making processes. Those are great. Please don't, please do those things. And at the same time, the how and the why underneath making any kinds of shifts in our structure or our operations or our grant making have to be really clearly driven by values, ones that we articulate or ones that we don't. And so we articulated ours as working for systemic equity, redistributing power, centering relationships, just underlining everything Kaci said about the importance of investing in true, authentic relationships of mutuality, because there's a lot of performance in philanthropy. So, and especially on the side of the group that has the least power, there's often a sense of needing to perform, needing to articulate themselves so that their missions, their strategies, their visions make sense under our rubrics. So getting rid of that need to be catered to is one of the things that we really value, and centering real relationships of learning and mutuality, partnering in a spirit of service. There's a lot of very ego-driven philanthropy that is about sort of, putting names on buildings, basically. Being accountable, and I think that Kaci also described a lot of ways to be accountable, and I'll share a few more examples of that. And overall, embracing learning, as opposed to embracing like very specific and strict definitions and outcomes of things that we expect from our grants. So I'll come back to that because I do want to talk about learning and impact a little bit. So I just wanted to share these values because these are the values that undergird everything we do, all of the resources that we create, and the way that we really define trust-based philanthropy. So I'm going to go back to this slide and say, so trust-based philanthropy is a buzzword in the sector right now. And it doesn't necessarily mean what we have achieved what we wanted to achieve. Because when we set out as the Whitman Institute way back when to try to donor organize and influence our peers, we really wanted to see a real shift in the ways that philanthropy hoarded wealth and hoarded power. So I think more recently, and at first we were talking about grant making practices themselves, like again, doing the homework, having really clear, thoughtful due diligence that we conduct on our own, not overburdening our partners, being willing to take and receive feedback from our partners. All of those things are fantastic. And we really believe that the grant making piece is very focused on, because that feels like where a lot of the energy is in our sector. But we wanted to zoom back out and say that we believe that trust-based philanthropy is actually a more holistic approach to organizational change, essentially, to becoming the kind of funder partner, funder collaborative that the Black Equity Initiative is. And it means really looking at culture and structure and how we're leading, as well as the grant making practices. So if you remember Kaci's presentation, Kaci didn't talk exhaustively about exactly how they do grant making. She was speaking to the values of centering the leadership and voices of the people we're accountable to, being long-term patient partners, essentially partnering in a spirit of service and real relationship, and scaling the investments to match the kind of change that we're hoping to fund people to do. So instead of thinking trust-based philanthropy equals multi-year general operating support, which again, VU calls that my God funding. We all love it, right? It's great in lots of situations. It is not only multi-year unrestricted funding. It is not only streamlining our grant making processes. It is really being willing to craft and create a foundational culture and matching structures. And what do I mean by structures? I mean HR policies. Do we treat within our, institutions and organizations, how are we treating our staff? How are we treating the staff that have the least power to shape policy? We're talking about, medical leave. Like we're talking about like compensation itself, like how are we actually structuring, the organization that is conducting this philanthropic practice, and what is its culture, so these are the things, and our leaders, humble, like collaborative, facilitative leaders, like obviously Kaci is? Are they the kind of leaders who listen, who lean in when there's, challenges, allow and create conditions for people to be truthful and vulnerable, offer to be helpful without being micromanaging or controlling? And one thing that you said, Kaci, that I think I want to emphasize is when we're leading in a trust-based way, our partners, even those with less power, in the relationship, feel at ease to share with us things that people don't share with other funders. I feel like I'm burning out and I want to quit today. I don't know if I'm going to make payroll in 3 months. The kinds of things that are really happening, especially in grassroots organizations, but often in many nonprofits of all different sizes, the kinds of real challenges they're dealing with as, the landscape of our political, economic, situation, in whether we're talking about locally or nationally or globally, is constantly shifting. So, being willing to kind of be a leader that isn't, that people don't have to perform for. All of these things, having a board that is in authentic relationship with its staff, that having a staff that's in authentic relationship with the community partners, all of this to me and to us is trust-based philanthropy, not simply a few grant-making technologies. So I wanted to emphasize that as kind of the working definition of trust-based philanthropy. And then I wanted to share, because I don't have that much more time left, I wanted to share a few ways that I think it's been powerful to see trust-based philanthropy implemented. Kaci just walked through such a clear and thoughtful example of that. And I wanted to share that from a few other foundations, there are some interesting lessons to learn and to maybe take into your context and adapt. One other thing I will say about trust-based philanthropy is that it looks different in different contexts, but it's driven often by the same why and the same set of values that you saw in Kaci's presentation and you saw on an earlier slide of mine. So here is Ashley from the Libra Foundation. And this is Ashley just reflecting on some of the structures and protocols and norms we have in philanthropy, whether they are giving circle formats or foundation formats or donor advised funds. It's that so many practices, so many things we do are the result of us trying to make ourselves feel better by mitigating a tiny bit of risk. And let's remember, risk on our side is mainly reputational, right? So there's just a lot of due diligence and a lot of compliance and a lot of like making folks, go around a hamster wheel to protect us or our endowments or our reputations, when really that's not the same kind of risks that these partners are often taking, right? When they are doing the work of, challenging systemic inequities at many levels in society. So I think we need to be braver and bolder, like Kaci said, and be willing to take on some of the risk that habitually, the people with more power feel like they don't want to take on. So, one of the things is to kind of challenge your internal orthodoxies, like the things that are gospel in your giving circle. For instance, prize philanthropy is something I think to really question, pitting folks against each other in pitches. If people still do that, it's not that, creating a philanthropy that is sort of feels like a competition or a Hunger Games, as Vu would say. I would, be ruthless about finding those kind of patterns at every level that need to be challenged because they need to be looked at with the lens of race equity and with power sharing. Ask why not on a regular basis. Why not eliminate grant proposals specifically written for us? Why not just receive proposals that have been written in the same time period that we're talking to a particular organization? Why not give 3, 5, 6, 9 year commitments as opposed to a single year? Lots of why nots in trust-based philanthropy. Widen our field of vision, meaning, maybe pay attention to the ecosystem in which our partners work in. I think often we get laser focused on the singular organizations that we're supporting without taking a look at the ecosystems they operate in and figuring out how to be an asset to that entire ecosystem. And when we're internal, be a credible heretic, be like a trustworthy skeptic, that we're not just breaking down patterns and norms because we want to be, nihilistic, but because we're trying to operate from our values and embody the values that we say we have. The last thing is the orthodoxy of attribution. There is so much attachment in philanthropy to this particular concept. We're going to give you money, whether it's unrestricted or restricted, for you to do a certain set of activities, for you to move the dial on racism or poverty or education, whatever the topic is. And some of our partners at Newcastle University have been really challenging this linear narrative of how change happens. It's as if we really bought this notion that was built by the Ford Foundation in the 1920s, that a grant can be given if the person, the NGO receiving the grant can promise to achieve, these 3 outcomes. And then we have to recognize how much things change so that the outcomes we think that we're working towards in January often will be very different by the time March rolls around. That's true in our own, institutions and organizations, in our own personal lives. Of course, it's true when we're talking about partners who are trying to make meaningful change at the grassroots level, in communities, policy level. So this idea of attribution has been very harmful. And if there's anything to take from my presentation, it's to question what we think our dollars are doing. Is it enough for us to strengthen the ecosystem of the community that we're working for, to build leadership? Because sometimes the outcomes that we get attached to and the things that they're writing, grant reports about are incredibly unrealistic in an 18-month period or a 2-year, 3-year, even 10-year period. And yet we're giving grants a year at a time or 2 years at a time. So again, just that, I'm going back to Kaci's presentation, which is so powerful, which is like match the investment with the scale of the change that we want to see. And, be willing to just be partners and collaborators in the long-term inquiry about how do we really dismantle structural racism economically, politically, socially, in housing and education, and every place. Like, how do we do that? Well, no one has a singular answer. And if we enter the relationship with a sense of inquiry, as opposed to a sense of we're evaluating these partners on, a few outcomes that they conceived of when they were writing this grant at midnight while, after they put their kids down, when they had to get up for a 4 a.m. flight, like we could participate in changing the narrative and the landscape of what social change looks like and how to support it. There's more on this from brilliant other folks like Chara Reed at the Center for Evaluation Innovation. And I love this quote from her, which is, as donors, funders, we should really be in the business of contribution rather than seeking out, attribution in our, basically for the personal egos of each of the donors and funders. And there's another resource here that I'm going to end on, which is, how do we frame our learning and evaluation in a trust-based way? And I think there are a few different ways to think about learning. There's learning for accountability, like our own accountability to our values. There's learning for decision-making. And I think learning for decision-making is often where all the data is driven towards in philanthropy. Decision-making about making a grant, decision-making about ending a grant, decision-making about continuing a grant. So all the data is kind of centered around, grant decisions, when really it could actually be centered around the last one, which I think is the most meaningful, which is I think what Kaci is talking about, which is about learning for long-term impact. I think the truth is trust-based philanthropy isn't about, just parachute the money into a community and run away. It's actually parachute in with the money, right? And become meaningful partners over a long period of time, because that is what it takes to create structural, new models and actually create social change. So I see that Maggie's coming on, which probably means my time is up. I really appreciate being a part of this conversation, and I look forward to continuing it in the next hour. Thank you.
Thank you, Pia, and thank you, Kaci, as well. You've given us so much to think about. We're going to take a quick break now and be back at the top of the hour for a conversation with you both and with Deepika, along with questions from our attendees. So everybody get up, stretch, take a break, grab a snack, Enjoy the slideshow. See you back at 2 p.m. Eastern. Welcome back to the 2022 Philanos Power Up Gathering. I'm Maggie Glasgow, Chair-elect of Philanos. But before we get back to our agenda and those marvelous speakers, I'd like to give a big Philanos shout out for the inaugural Give to Women and Girls Day. This new annual Giving Day is launching right now in the same hour at the Women's Philanthropy Institute at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. Philanos is an anchor partner for this initiative. Jeannie Sager, director of WPI, will be speaking at our November 8th webinar on their latest research findings on trends in funding to women and girls. Also speaking is Christina Gordon, co-founder and CEO of Philanos affiliate, the Women's Foundation of Boston, which funds exclusively to women and girls. Watch for your invitation coming soon. But back to today, and for those of you who were in attendance last hour, wow, let's welcome back our speakers. And if you're just joining us, we heard inspirational and thought-provoking ideas from both Kaci Patterson, founder and chief architect of the Black Equity Collective, and Pia Infante, the senior fellow at the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project. In the next 50 minutes, we're going to hear more from Kaci and Pia in a discussion moderated by Philanos board member Deepika Andavarapu. Deepika is a member of Impact 100 Cincinnati, where she was their first DEI committee chair. In that role, she led the development of Impact 100's DEI strategic plan, and under her leadership, the organization's diversity more than doubled in 2 years. Today, incorporating an equity lens in its grant making is a top priority for her Impact 100 group. Since coming to the Philanos board, Deepika has been involved with affiliate engagement, facilitating our peer-to-peer affinity groups regarding DEI issues. Deepika is also the founder and CEO of Deep Consultants, where she brings her background as an urban planning scholar, a community researcher, and an evaluator to bear on her work with government agencies, nonprofits, and other philanthropic organizations. Before I turn it over to Deepika to lead this discussion, please note the chat remains open for comments or shares, and the Q&A button is on your Zoom toolbar to use for questions for Kaci and Pia, because after Deepika gets her questions answered, she will turn to yours. Now here's Deepika.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the lovely introduction, Maggie. I appreciate it. Kaci and Pia, phenomenal presentation. And looks like both of you are throwing huge challenges at us. And I'm like gratefully accepting them on behalf of all of the collective giving organizations. And thank you for inspiring us and challenging us and pushing us on this amazing journey. So we have a list of questions from our members already. And if anybody else that has questions for us, please add them to the Q&A. Our team is moderating them, and I will pose those questions to Kaci and Pia. So Kaci, my first question is to you. I love your running metaphor. And I have done my fair share of half marathons, and I totally hear what you're saying. It is amazing in the front end, it is horrible in the middle, and then it gets exciting and exuberant at the end when you hear the music and the people cheering, when you see the flags, and then when you cut through it, there's a huge celebration. So it is exciting, the last piece of the journey. So how do we know, like on this journey, and when you are on this funder's journey and you're trying to become a trust-based leader and a partner, and as you said, want to have that heartwarming conversations with our partners, how do we know where we are on that journey? We are starting off with a lot of amazing fun, but in the middle, I think when it gets dark, how do we know that we're in the middle and that we're going to make it to the end?
Yeah, such a good question. And I'll sort of carry the analogy forward, Deepika, and say, similarly, when you're starting off at a marathon and, you've got that feeling of, I can do this. I'm ready. There's a lot of, that sort of psychology that exists when we're getting into these new spaces, right? And we say like, okay, as Pia said, we've got our values, we're ready. We want to dive in. We're making statements. We're making commitments. We're ready to do the hard work. And then we get into the hard work and we think, oh, this is harder than I thought, and there's some pause that happens. So for example, one of the things, and someone I think it wrote a question in the chat, like similar to this, is like, how do we know, right? Like that we're in these sort of tough moments, and how do we get to the other side? I'll answer it in a pithy way and say that I think that you're to the other side when, as funders, you move from decision maker to facilitator. And that is a very different orientation that we as funders have. We are used to being in a decision-making capacity. We are not used to shifting decision-making outside of our hands and being a facilitator of decisions and not decision makers ourselves. And getting to that turn, that's really the end of the marathon, the celebration, the music playing. That's when you've made it, so to speak, is when you have moved from decision maker to facilitator, because you trust that the decisions that are being made by the organizations and by community are the better decisions than the ones that you could ever make. And so I would say where it gets tough is in that transition from decision maker to facilitator. For example, in giving circles, and I've dealt with this in my own giving circle, I manage and support a lot of pooled funds, and so, which is a type of giving circle, a more institutional giving circle. And so this inevitably happens. The folks who contribute to the fund or contribute to the circle have an expectation that they get a say in where the dollars go. And one of the one of the pooled funds that I manage, that is absolutely not the case. The funder donates to the circle and they have absolutely no position of authority to make a single decision. And they know that going in. But getting used to that comfortability of being able to cede all decision-making power is an uncomfortable space. And that requires a shift in psychology. That requires a level of, trust in a process, an unfamiliar process that you probably haven't undertaken and undergone. And so some of those are the examples that I would use in terms of how do you sort of push past the discomfort of the way we've always done things and move into this place of this is the way we should be doing things. And how do we move from decision maker to facilitator in a way that really shifts power, as Pia was describing.
Wow, that is paradigm shifting. It's like from a funder to a facilitator. That is powerful. Pia, you want to add anything to this conversation?
Oh, that's beautiful. I would just lift up that same thing that Kaci, what you were talking about in your presentation, which is we know when we're trusted because people will then share with us things that they don't normally share with a donor or funder. I mean, I've gotten very frank phone calls and folks will tell you, this is not something I would normally tell a funder or a donor. But because I know that it's not going to have negative repercussions and you will actually try to support me, I'm going to share this with you. So it's, I sometimes think about it as dating, like you get the sense that we're still early, now we've matured, but similarly with dating. And I think the hard part about it sometimes is that if we're not going to go into a funding, I think we need to cut it, like we need to say it very soon. Like, I think we waste people's time. They think they're courting us through relationship building when really we know from probably close to the beginning that, the circle is not going to fund to them or the collaborative is not going to fund them. So I think it's sort of this responsibility to realize not every relationship has these dimensions. They are the relationships that you're investing in as a donor and a funder, and therefore they reinvest in you. but it's not having this kind of meaningful relationship with everyone who wants our funding, because we don't have the capacity, and then we're misleading people. So anyways.
I think that's so interesting. And it is actually saving them so much time in the long run. Like, if they are not going to be funded, they would rather use this energy somewhere else and the expertise somewhere else, rather than waste the time with this. There is a follow-up question.
Can I hop in on that before you go to your follow-up question? Because I think it's a really important point that I don't want to miss. One of the things that, when I started working, I always used to tell people that, I was in philanthropy for years before I knew it, and then when I actually knew that I was in philanthropy, I was in a bit of a culture shock. And part of the culture shock was, one, the pace of decision making. So decisions happen at a much slower pace in philanthropy than they happen on the ground in community. So that was a real culture shock, the pace of decision making. And the other thing that was a real culture shock was the amount of information that gets hoarded by a funder under this guise of, we don't want to create quote unquote false expectations. But what that essentially does is it creates a lot of mystique. And it creates a lot of unnecessary mystery around what it takes to be in partnership with you. And so one of the things that I like to do when I'm working, particularly with Black-led organizations, because again, there's such a barrier to entry, for many Black-led organizations in funding. One of the things I like to do is demystify philanthropy. Like, bring them behind the veil and say, here are the kinds of conversations that people are having. Here are the kind of questions that people are going to be asking. And so really helping them to get a sense of what are some of the sort of social factors, right? These sort of unspoken rules that happen in philanthropy, that are just part of culture, right? That we don't necessarily communicate to the nonprofit organizations that are seeking to partner with us. And so I would agree 100% with Pia. And in answering your question as well, Deepika, I would say we know that we are getting there when we have demystified the funding process, and we have taken out the mystique of what it means to actually partner with us effectively.
Yeah, and I think to your point, when our grant partners are having those open, honest conversations with us, like, when they can truly trust us, and we are able to support them in this process, in this journey. Thank you so much for that. And a follow-up question that I see in the Q&As, in the example that you gave, Kaci, who makes the funding decisions? You said the funder gave the funds in the circle. Is that the circle of like Black-led initiatives that are making the decisions?
Yeah, so the way we do it, there's sort of like two parallel processes. And when I say like funding decisions are delegated, I mean like every part of the decision-making process is delegated. And so in one particular fund that I've worked on, we actually delegated the design of the grant program itself to the community-based organizations. And what I did was facilitated, we had what we called a design committee. And I facilitated meetings with them every month. And every month we answered one strategic question that would then basically create the grant program. So for example, is this funding going to be county-wide, or is it only going to be available to the two communities that this initiative is sort of highlighting? So that's one strategic question that we pose. So if we, because it's going to be different, if we say that it's a countywide funding availability, then that's going to have a different number of applicants than if we say it's only going to be for these particular communities. So we put that decision in their hands. So for 9 months, I facilitated conversations with this design committee. And at the end of the 9 months, the grant program was designed. And so it was the grant that they wanted to see. Not the grant that I thought they needed as a funder, but the grant that they wanted to see. And then once we got the applications in, again, we delegated decision-making authority to a review committee. That review committee comprised predominantly, this particular grant was about Black birthing justice. And so it was predominantly Black women who had been working in birth equity for a number of years. There was one funder and one person from the county department. So again, we thought about power. And we wanted to make sure that we shifted the power to folks who were in community. And so that review committee reviewed all of the applications, and through a consensus-based process that I facilitated, they then made decisions about who got the dollars. So again, like, we took ourselves completely out of the decision-making role from design to decision, and really turned that over to the folks who knew the work better than we did, who had the relationships on the ground that we didn't have, and who had the trust of community in a way that we didn't have. And so again, really being committed to the centering of an experience that we don't have. You know, we didn't have that experience as funders, but being able to shift it to centering their experience and then putting the decision-making power in their hands is a way in which, you know, we were able to shift from decision maker to facilitator.
Wow. Yeah, that is super powerful. And I think it goes to your point, Kaci, about data is always lagging on the lived experience, because many of the lived experience people who are making the decision know about what's hitting them on the ground much earlier than we as a funder or, like, you know, as a collective giving organization would ever even hear about it. So I see the value in that. So there are two follow-up questions. It looks like this is a good track, good conversation. People are interested in it. So the next question, I think, is to your point, Pia. This move from decision maker to facilitator, it will be really difficult in a collective giving group. How are the members engaged in partnering with the community? So I think either of you can answer this question, Kaci or Pia. Yeah.
You want to go ahead, Kaci? Do you have thoughts about this one?
Yeah, I mean, I can answer it from the perspective of the Giving Circle that I founded and lifted up for 8 years. Again, I feel like I'm going to be a broken record, but I don't know how else to answer the question. And that is to say, invest in building the relationships with people on the ground. And there are, I would say, you know, I know a lot of Black leaders, I mean, who run organizations. And I would say there are probably a handful that I know I can call and they're going to give it to me straight. You know, like they are the tuning fork, you know? And so when I reach out to them and say, hey, this is what we're thinking about, this is what we're considering, like, how does that jive with what you're seeing on the ground? Like, are we out of step? Are we, you know, where are we in all of this? And they'll give it to me straight, you know? And I know that when I hear from them, they're giving it to me honestly, and they're giving it to me, you know, again, from a very like real time experience that they're having, that I don't have to go spend 6 months studying. I could just call up Pete White and say, what's going on down at Skid Row, you know, that I need to know about. And so I really believe that the investment in relationship, really making sure that you have people you can pick up the phone and call and asking them for their honest feedback and opinion, asking them, I think this is what we're thinking. Help me to see the blind spots. If you just ask those simple questions, if you, one of my favorite questions to ask, you know, folks in community is, what are we not paying attention to right now that in 5 years we will wish we had? If you ask that question, you will be amazed at what gets illuminated for you in terms of things that you never even considered. And asking those kind of questions are ways to start to build trust, because there's a sense that you have genuine interest in what are the challenges that they're facing and the things that you can't see, you know, because you're not living it in the same way that they are. So those are just, you know, some things that I would offer, is to be really committed, you know, to identifying and building relationships with people who will tell you the truth.
So yeah, that is actually very powerful. And I think in one of the challenges from I think one way we can do that is trying to get more women of color with lived experience on these circles to just make sure that those voices are heard. But what you are talking about is actually having or having listening sessions or having a facilitated conversation with leaders in the community to kind of inform the grant making process. Because I think many of us are very early in that stage. We don't have the ear or even know who that person is that we can call and talk to. So I think there is a discovery phase that we have to go through if we are going on this journey. And that is one of the biggest challenges for some collective giving circles. And I see some questions in that space is, there are a lot of older funders, like we have NP. I love those, what did you call them? The orthodoxies that you brought up. I mean, like they were right on, right? Like I think we are embedded, like my journey to philanthropy is relatively new. And I think those are some of those things that I've heard and keep hearing is those, we have to be responsible for our funding. We have to make sure that it is used the way it is supposed to be used. So we have some fiduciary responsibilities. So how do we start like these harder conversations? Like if you are much earlier in the journey, like we have done philanthropy this way.
Yeah, I'd love to address this. I see a bunch of questions coming up in the chat that are essentially, if we shift the focus of our tiny staff. So what I'm also hearing is we have tiny staffs and volunteers that basically change very often. So how do we do this like long-term partnership if the in the Giving Circle house are shifting? So that's one kind of set of questions. And then another set of questions feels like, and then if we become facilitators or, we move from all of our energy is around making the decisions and evaluating those decisions, what do we spend our time doing? So I think it's a question of the structure of the circle itself, what its purpose and intention is. So if the invitation is even if you're only going to be around for a year, that this Giving Circle is in a long-term partnership with the community of Detroit or the community of Oakland, California, to understand how to best resource Black liberation, or how to best create new economic models that are regenerative, or how to best, be reparative towards Indigenous tribes, whatever it is. I think the circle needs to have a purpose, and that purpose has to, exist beyond whoever is involved as a volunteer. And then that way the invitation for volunteers and for the leaders who are coming in is come and do a PhD in what it really takes in Detroit or in DC or in Oakland to do this work on the ground, to do it in a principled way, to do it in a long-term way, to do it in a trust-based way. So the invitation isn't come and participate for a year because you get to practice the power exercise of making a decision about money. Honestly, that's what that is, right? It's an exercise in feeling like I'm doing good, but the actual process is about the power to shape the process, right? So it's like giving up that, but replacing it really with what I think is really underneath that motivation is a desire to be helpful, a desire to be of service, a desire to see the change happen in that same community that we're all living in at different vantage points. So maybe the invitation to the volunteers and the leaders is come learn with this community over time. And the time that you spend is not going to be in that kind of like constant cycle of like, here's an RFP, now we have to review the RFP applications, but we're really proactively partnering with a set of both maybe steady long-term partners and maybe year to year or every couple of years, there's some emergence. There's some kind of really different thing. A student group has started over at the high school and we want to support that, but they're not one of our long-term partners. People sort of hear trust-based philanthropy and think, oh my gosh, that means, there's never anything that emerges. We're just sticking by this one organization for 20 years. It's like, yes, and because there's a lot to learn with sticking by an organization for 20 years, but there's also a lot to learn by being in the community and aware of what's emerging and what collaborations we could resource. I mean, even over COVID, so many beautiful things happened around donors and funders saying, can we provide mental health support? Can we give your ED sabbatical? Like really being present in the moment of what's happening in the community, as opposed to being present in the parallel process of what is our strategic plan at the level of this organization or this Giving Circle, which feels really bifurcated and divorced from often what's really happening in the world. So it is an invitation for those who feel maybe a lot of pride in those structures of, I'm a volunteer, because I want to participate and learn about all these groups and then help make decisions about who to fund. There's no stopping us from learning about all of the groups that are in our community. In fact, that's part of the bigger invitation. It's sort of like reimagining what the purpose of the circle is. And the grant making function becomes a lot less important. And then the power laden imbalances of power that are laden within that structure, which are basically built into all of philanthropy and most of our society, we're actually questioning those from a values perspective. We're saying, so it's really interesting. You see all these institutions say they believe in equity or racial justice, but their processes, their structures, their internal culture continue to hold on to many of the attitudes and the kind of patronizing ways that philanthropy can be framed as charity for, like charity and not the best way, charity in a condescending or like, I know the answers and I'm going to help lead you to the right water kind of way. I feel like, and this might be hard to hear. I don't want it to be heard as sort of questioning the motives of giving circles that are structured in that more traditional way. It's more an invitation to creativity, to relationship, to just being in the role differently and to having a different set of inputs, and using the data that we're aggregating for slightly different reasons. But we still, I think, get the payoff of we want to be of help in this community or on this issue or, to these organizations. So anyways, sorry, I'm rambling, but so we're trying to summarize my answer.
Yeah, Pia, I think that's really, really great point, because sometimes when I talk about collective giving, I always kind of use an example of Shark Tank. Like we get to pick the projects that will move the needle in the community. And what you are saying is powerful, because in the trust-based model, we're not investing in projects, we're investing in organization, we are investing in people, we are investing in relationships. So it's shifting the way we do business and changing or like why we are coming together. So thank you for that. And I think there's a really powerful follow-up question. And it's, okay, I don't see it anymore. So one of the question, I think this one is, how do you get the time from the community members to design the grants? I think Kaci is going back to what you said, is like they are overextended. The people on the ground are overextended and have little time to devote to this kind of activity over time. So how do we do it in a mindful and intentional way without being more of like yet another thing? For them.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the way I structured it was I wanted highest best use when they came to the meetings, which meant that I wanted their strategic community intelligence. I didn't want them doing a bunch of work in between. I did all the work in between, So when they came to the meetings, it was, here's the strategic question we want to answer. Help us to answer it. After the meeting, I'll go back and assemble it all, do all the note taking, all the things, right, to make sure that we're moving the process along. So really trying to just center them in the highest best use of their strategic thinking. Okay, that's number one. So that meant that we didn't ask them to, we met once a month for 2 hours. I wasn't asking them for any more time in between. That was all I needed from them in order to be able to move the ball forward. But I also would say that you would be surprised at how willing people are to come to the table when they know that their voice is not only going to be heard, but that their voice is going to shape the way in which the work happens, because they never get the opportunity to do that. They are always on the receiving side. They're always responding to an RFP. They are never creating it. And so the ability to actually be in that space and actually sort of bring them into the mind of a funder a little bit. How would you structure this, in a way that was inclusive? Those I think are incredible skills, right, that they want to be able to bring to bear. And then, of course, we stipend them. Particularly in 2022, we do not ask people of color to work for free. So We stipend them for their contributions to our thinking, because if we would have hired a consultant to do this, we would have been more than willing to pay that consultant fee. And so we have to see them as experts. We have to see them as consultants to us and helping us to design the best, most equitable and inclusive process. And I'll just add that, one of the things that it is more work. And this is where that difficulty in the middle of the marathon comes in, right? Because it requires a stamina that we're not used to.
Yes.
We have a tendency to just want to get it done. And so we have a tendency to just want to make the decisions and get it over with and get the money out because everything is so urgent. But I would submit that, and I actually said this to a funder one time who wanted to work with me and, wanted me to, help them do this racial justice analysis in 3 months and, blah, 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 blah. And I said to her, here's the thing, here's the good news and the bad news. The good news is that you don't have to rush, because the bad news is whether you start today or whether you start a year from now, you're going to be on time, because we are not going to solve racism in a year. So I do think that there's this tendency that we have to want to move with this sense of urgency. And yes, it is urgent, but there is nothing more urgent than having deep, long-lasting relationships and getting it right. We can do it fast or we can do it right. And to me, doing it right means that the pressure isn't on me as the funder who has less information. The pressure isn't on me to make all the right decisions, to invite, the community into the process, to center them in the decision-making role means that they are helping us to get it right. And I don't have to take the pressure and the responsibility of that on myself. But it does take more time. It does take more investment, of your staff, of your own personal time. And that's the part that gets tough for people to push past.
Yes. And I think, thank you so much, Kaci. There was another question going back. There was a question, Kaci, again about your counseling for Black-led nonprofits to help them improve their grant writing. Some of our grantees could really use this help. Can you tell us more? It's from Karen from Gilgoff Giving Together, Karen Gilgoff Giving Together, Inc. So do you have any suggestions for Karen from your helping Black-led nonprofits capacity building?
Yeah, and so I'm going to say, obviously I come from my experience of working with Black-led organizations, but I think this applies across the board, okay? So the funder who hired me, they were 3 Jewish siblings, okay? And so when they were coming into this exploration and really wondering what they could do, how their philanthropy could intervene, and then I mentioned that they also sort of sat back and said, well, maybe we aren't the best ones to actually explore this question. Maybe we actually need to bring in someone who has more community credibility in the Black community than we do, okay? So that was one very important decision. They did not try to insert themselves into a community they had no idea about from a lived experience perspective, okay? And so because I was sort of this buffer, if you will, between the organizations and the funder, they knew that they could have a more honest conversation with me than they would be willing to have with the funder. And so as I started to see, some of their LOIs coming in, I saw that they were kind of quote unquote missing the mark. And again, there's a lot of mystique, there's a lot of mystery. And so what I ended up doing is I said to the funder, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have some coaching sessions with these organizations so that we have a chance to talk through their work. Again, as Black folks, we come from a very oral tradition. And in philanthropy, there's a lot of worship of the written word. Okay. And so me being able to have conversations with them and say, well, let me hear your work. Let me understand like the context of your work, the nuance of your work. And when I can hear it, then I can say, so what I hear you're saying is this, this, that, and the other. So here's how to translate that into a grant application. And so being able to have that time with them, with someone who they trust, with someone who they know is not going to be punitive, with someone who they know is there to help them get over the hurdle and not, critique and criticize their work, but to really understand where they're coming from and be able to translate. I often describe myself as a translator. And I often say that when you think of me as someone who, there's if you say hola, hi, and ciao, you are saying the exact same thing, but the language that you're using is different, and the cultural context that you're coming from is unique. And so you need someone who understands how to situate hi, hola, and ciao so that everybody is understanding the same thing. And that's essentially the role that I played. And so what I'm saying is, as you all are thinking about how to build trust, recognize that particularly, as white funders, if you're trying to fund in communities of color, you don't always have the credibility that you need, because the history of this country should inform you and let you know that when white people come into a community of color, rarely does it end well for them. Even if your intentions are pure, the history of this country should inform you in saying that, you know what, maybe they're not going to see my presence as very welcoming. And so maybe I need to create a way for trust to be facilitated where it's not me. And so those are some of the things that, in terms of shifting the way we approach relationship building and recognizing that maybe we are not always the best messenger, and really understanding who is the best messenger for this particular constituency, and how do we empower them to have the kind of relationship with community that can be a support, a thought partner, a coach, all the things that you're describing in terms of wanting to help Black-led organizations with some of their grant writing.
Kaci, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, that is such a huge pain point, because I think, as you said, as funders and collective giving organizations, one of the pain points that we have to reckon with is most of our collective giving organizations are white-led, like majority white-led. And the challenges, the problems that we are trying to solve, or the wicked problems that we see in our communities, are mostly centered in communities of color. And that is a huge barrier when you're trying to do this trust-based philanthropy work. And I think the other piece of that puzzle is many of the collective giving models, like the Impact 100 that I come from, we pride ourselves on giving 100% of the money that we raise back to the community. So there is very little in terms of assets, funds, resources available to do this deep relationship trust work. So I think, so those, Pia, do you have any comments or anything to add to this conversation? Because that is exactly the biggest pain point that we are having right now.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate both of your wisdom on this. There's a question from Linda in the chat, how can that trust be facilitated?
Yeah.
I think, it's a really good question. I don't know that there's a prescriptive, here's the protocol for this.
Yeah.
I think that we have to be willing to take the time to become seen as trustworthy.
Mm-hmm.
And that means, just like in any relationship, right? I have a toddler, and there's something about just like consistency, that they remember everything. They literally remember everything. She remembers everything I've ever promised. She'll tell me, like, last week you said I could have a lollipop after school and I didn't have one. It's like, so not to say that all communities are like toddlers, but the idea being like, there's no shortcut to building a strong. There's no shortcut to, being willing to be distrusted. I see some questions in the chat that are like, well, some of the groups don't even want to reach out to, like, respond to us, or, so in those situations, I think the worst we can do is kind of steamroll and kind of say, well, look, I want to help you, so I'm going to like steamroll into the situation. And I'll just give a really brief example, because just to be tangible, there's a group called Women Engage that we had been supporting for many years that does a lot of like base building and community building and power building for young Black folks and women in Georgia. And during the last election cycle, when there were like these 2 really contested Senate seats, there were all these funders and donors like pouring into Georgia, flooding her inbox, like showing up at her organization's office saying like, we want to support you. We want to support you because they had been doing this long-term work in Georgia. But they all wanted her time. They all wanted her to like write things and do things specifically for them. And she was completely flooded in a special election cycle, and was basically like, I can't do everything that you're asking for. I can't build a relationship with you right now. Are you kidding? Like, the election's like in 8 days, So there's also just kind of being aware of the context that our partners are in. Maybe they didn't respond to your email because someone got shot. Like they're just dealing with life and running this organization or this movement. And so there's a way we have to decenter ourselves as like, well, we got money, so you have to treat us like we're important in this scenario. You know what I mean? And I think that the way we facilitate trust is we say, we're not just here with our checkbook trying to create sort of a space for myself in this ecosystem where I never existed before just because I have a checkbook. It's like, I want to become a learner. I want to be told this is how I can be helpful. I mean, it's tough to swallow. We want the instant gratification of thank you so much. You are so wonderful. You are funding my organization. We really need you. We really, like, in a way, like, it's asking ourselves, why are we doing this? Right. Are we doing it for that kind of instant gratification of being told that we're good? Or are we doing it because we actually want to see the same changes that our partners are working for on the ground? And so I think these questions around how do you build trust? What if they don't trust us? There's a bridge, there's like a differential in race, in class, in kind of power. The only way to approach that is to approach it with an awareness of the footprint that we have, and be able to hold that in our hand, not in a kind of like pitiful way, but like, I get it. I'm coming to the table because I want to support what's already happening versus thinking that my money should drive you now, which is, I think that's the way money works in our capitalist system. It's like, I have the dollars, so now look, is Elon Musk now going to drive all of public discourse? He's $44 billion. That is basically like the huge kind of elephant footprint. And I know that we in our donor circles could never imagine ourselves to be an Elon Musk type, right? We're not that kind of person. Like, we've never do that, but that is the kind of footprint we can have in a community that is strapped for resources, regardless of how we think of ourselves. We have to be willing to understand how we're being understood and received. I mean, there's no way around that. There's no trust-based philanthropy 3 steps you can do to become trusted. There's just the work, of doing that. That's all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll chime in, Deepika, and answer or speak to, the point you raised, and hopefully offer another point of view as well around the ethos of not taking any administrative cost in order to get all the money out into the community, right? I think on its face, it is a noble cause. But I think in practicality, it's probably one of those things that you need to rethink for a couple reasons. One, because it does cost money to run operations, there's no getting around it. It does cost money to run operations. And so you need to be able to run operations. 2, I think it also sort of subtly, and maybe not so subtly, puts that same expectation onto the organization that you're funding. Because if you're able to get by with 100% of money going out into the field, then there's this expectation that they don't spend their money on any of their back office either that they're getting from you.
Mhm.
And that's the wrong expectation, to put on, to organizations. And again, if you are going to engage in this more sort of trust-based approach, it is a relationship-based endeavor, which means that you're going to have to put money into the ability to build, cultivate, and sustain relationships. The other thing that I will say, and Deep and I, or excuse me, P and I talked about this a little bit in our prep for this conversation today, is the enormous opportunity that giving circles in particular have to be strategically disruptive, to have as at your core the desire to do it differently, particularly because you're not beholden to payouts that a foundation is beholden to. You don't have deep institutional norms, that are very difficult to overcome, that usually in giving circles and collective, sort of giving models, you're usually people who care about an issue, who want to see a change and want to go about funding that change in the best way possible. You have the unlimited possibility to be strategically disruptive. What would it mean? Instead of funding an organization's programs and services, what would it mean to say, how can we fund you to build deeper trust with your partners in community? What would that look like? How can we fund your organization to have deeper and more sustainable impact? What would that look like? When we were doing this work with the Black Equity Initiative, we got to the point where I started saying, you know what we're doing? We are funding social justice R&D. We are funding the ability of organizations to take their ideas and to take some of the things that they've been wanting to do, but they don't have the freedom and flexibility to do because traditional funding wants them to have everything mapped out, all the outcomes listed, all of the outputs designed, everything has to be very thought out and prescriptive. But what if we actually funded their ability to think and dream? What if we actually funded their ability to create new ways of being? What if we gave that a shot? And so that's part of what I want to posit for this group today, is the incredible power that you have to re-engineer, what it means to do philanthropy, precisely because you don't have the same kind of institutional frameworks that are beholding you to a certain way we have to do grant making. You have the ability to dream, and because you have the ability to dream, you can actually provide the capital for organizations to dream too.
Yes, I think I absolutely love that, Kaci. I think we are a group of amazing women who are very committed to improving our communities, and we do not have the strings attached as a city or a county or a big Rockefeller Foundation. Like, we can be nimble, we can be innovative, we can be creative, and we can be the litmus test of new ideas, right? So I absolutely love the way you portrayed it, and I think that is what we're talking about when you say become a facilitator rather than a funder who is stuck on attribution and contribution. Tia, like, is that how you put it? I think that is a piece of this conversation. I think that is one way to look at collective giving circles, is that by being partners with the grant makers rather than funders, we can allow for this creative, inspirational, innovative practices or programs that don't have to necessarily wait for the data to trickle down 2 or 3 years down the lane, but we can act on the realities of what's happening on the ground. We have that potentiality to experiment. So I just absolutely love that.
Yeah, thank you. I want to lift up to the live conversation, a conversation that's happening in the chat, which is being brought forward by Lee, which is that, the people that are here listening are people who volunteer their time and have, very good, respectful intentions. and that we may be stereotyping a little bit some of the other kinds of trends that we've seen in the sector. So in the chat, Lee, I absolutely agree with you. We may be using examples that don't actually match each of the giving circles that are represented here. But I do want to speak to something which is about good intentions themselves. And I think that I'll just tell a brief story. So I'm seen as like an example of trust-based philanthropy, and I got a very angry email from a group when I was a funder, from a group that we had funded annually for like 2 or 3 years. And the angry email was basically, I don't understand why you're not funding us this year. You funded us for the past couple of years. You're out there talking about trust-based philanthropy. What a terrible thing you're doing. And I had a real conversation with them, and I said, I apologize for the oversight of not realizing that I wasn't communicating well. When I was obviously making annual grants in succession would make you think, oh, we've now become a multi-year grantee of this foundation. And, I remember receiving the email, and I felt so hurt, do they understand my heart? My whole life is just dedicated to trying to get other funders, to do things differently. But I just have to calibrate that sometimes my good intentions and sometimes our collective good intentions, our individual good intentions, our giving circles good intentions, we still need to check on how they're really landing with the people that we're saying that we want to support. So I respectfully say, I do not mean to demonize anybody, present here. I am using examples that I've seen with my own eyeballs many, many times in philanthropy about power and how people hold it in decision-making, in giving circles, but also in many other contexts. And I will say that I am not a giving circle leader, and nor am I like Kaci or Deepika, like a leader in giving circles. So I will acknowledge my ignorance, absolutely, and possibly who's represented on the call. But just to lift out the lesson of just having good intentions does not mean that we don't want to check back with our impact or even revisit the structures that our good intentions created. It's just part of the process. It's not a personal slight about anyone. It's actually structural, systemic, and institutional. It's how we get at institutional racism and equity work, is that we have to be willing, to even with the best motives, even when we're being held up as the highest example of racial equity. Kaci, I'm sure you've gotten feedback before, and people didn't feel like you were matching kind of your outward messaging. And I just think we have to be willing to receive that, and to integrate that. So I hope that that's okay to speak to directly.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for acknowledging that, Priya. And I think I did get carried away with the inspiration a little bit, but it is a group of committed volunteers who are giving their time, their energies, their dedicated years of their lives to improving the communities. These amazing women, they know their communities like the back of their hand. They have worked with their grant partners. So there's absolutely it's not saying that they have done anything wrong, but that's just that we live in a new reality now. Things are shifted so drastically. There's the racial reckoning. We are dealing with the whole pandemic. A lot of things have shifted over the years. So I think it's time for and I think over the years, we've also realized what we thought are best practices are not necessarily serving the purpose. So I think this conversation, as hard as it is, I think it's a very important conversation to have. I know it is these uncomfortable conversations that actually give us a pause and allow us to kind of look ourselves in the mirror and reassess what we are and what we do. There are a few other questions that we haven't touched, but maybe we just have 2 more minutes. So Kaci, there was a question for you where somebody was asking if they can get a list of 15 organizations that you worked with.
Sure, I can.
Speakers.
So I'll be happy to follow up and give that to the conference planners, Maggie, Nancy, and others, and then you all they can share it out.
Awesome. There. What else? Oh, there was another question about the slide that you showed about all the Black-led nonprofits. Do you have a number, how many Black-led nonprofits there are versus how many white nonprofits there are, at a national level?
No, not a number in totality. You know, I can say that particular slide was taken from a 2020 report that was done by the Greenlining Institute and Bridge Span Group. And it evaluated a number of Black-led organizations in comparison to white-led organizations, but it didn't give like a universal, this is the number of Black-led organizations in America, this is the number of white-led organizations. I will say, just for the purposes of the Black Equity Collective, our network right now consists of 52 Black-led and empowering organizations across 3 counties in Southern California, and that number is growing. So there are several, organizations that are doing very good work on the ground.
Yeah, that was another pain point when we were starting to lead the DEI initiative in Impact 100 is nobody knows how many Black-led nonprofits there are or how many people of color-led nonprofits there are in a community. Like there is a lot more awareness of these larger institutional nonprofits that have been there for a while. So I guess there is that gap in especially at a community to community level. Maybe it's different in LA and the East and West Coast. There might be more data availability, but the smaller regions, probably there is that gap in understanding how many nonprofits exist. Well,
and I'll just add to that point, particularly in the smaller areas, that you may not find organizations per se. What you may find are leaders who are doing community work. Because oftentimes, at least this is what we've learned in California and more rural parts of the state, that there are Black leaders who are doing really incredible work. There are, Latinx leaders who are doing really incredible work. They don't necessarily have a nonprofit, quote unquote, organization because they don't have the funding to establish one. They still have to work full time. Yeah. And so they do their community work on the side. So I would say it's not only sort of exploring the organizations, but who are the leaders in the communities that are doing good work as well. So thank you. I know we're out of time, but I just wanted to make that quick note.
I think that's a great point. Thank you, Pia. Thank you, Kaci, for all the wisdom and inspiration and the thought and intentionality that you shared, and you have blown our minds away. It is an ongoing process of becoming a better philanthropist and human beings. So these lessons are ones we are all going to have conversations about in our own circles and probably thinking about it in our dreams a little bit. Speaking of heart, here's a reminder to stay tuned and come back for our final hour when we will be honoring Philanos affiliates and the women who do this work every single day with our Spotlight and Willoughby Award presentations. See you for the celebration right after the break. We cut it down a little bit short, but try to come back here at the top of the hour at 3 o'clock. See you soon.
Hello, I'm Maggie Glasgow, Chair-elect of Philanos, and I want to welcome back all who have been attending our Philanos PowerUp 2022 gathering today. I hope you've enjoyed learning and having a deeper conversation about the importance of DEI and trust-based philanthropy in the past 2 hours. If you're just joining us, be assured that the recordings of the previous 2 sessions with Pia Infante of the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project and Kaci Patterson of the Black Equity Collective will be available in a few days for you to watch. All who registered for this gathering will get an email letting you know when they are ready to share. But now, live from Philanos, our 2022 awards celebration. This hour is all about you, the women of Philanos, and the work you are doing. We are honoring affiliates who've done some extraordinary grant making with our annual Spotlight Awards, followed by the presentation of the Willoughby Award to a woman changemaker among us. We are fortunate to have the 2 women who shepherded the selection processes with us today. We will begin with the Spotlight Awards, presented by Philanos Board Secretary Ellen Bernstein, who's also a member of Impact 100 Philadelphia. Ellen chaired the Spotlight Awards Committee. Once she has recognized all our Spotlight awardees, Ellen will pass the celebration to founding board member Laura Midgley, to present our Willoughby finalists and awardee. Laura is a member of the Washington Women's Foundation in Seattle and also a member of the Wood River Women's Foundation in Ketchum, Idaho. So sit back and relax, or stand up and move, and get ready to cheer and celebrate all your accomplishments. Ellen, it's all yours.
Thank you, Maggie, for the introduction. I am Ellen Bernstein, and I am the chair of the Spotlight Awards Committee. I am so excited to be here today and to announce the Spotlight Awards. Philanos gives a national voice to the high-impact collective giving movement. To put into perspective the reach of the collective giving movement, our 80+ affiliates from across the country have collectively granted $200 million in transformational grants. The purpose of Philanos is to accelerate the power of our network organizations. You, the people that are on this webinar today, you are the ones that practice high impact transformational grant making. Normally, we make the Spotlight Awards presentations at our national conference, but since we are moving towards gathering in person after COVID, we are gathered here virtually one more time. We are so glad that so many of you have joined in from around the country. The Spotlight Award is our opportunity to highlight how Philanos affiliates are strengthening the collective giving movement through grant making. The Spotlight Awards celebrate women-powered philanthropy, philanthropic efforts by highlighting grants that demonstrate the multiplier effect of impact investing in community nonprofits. These awards recognize grants that have had one or more of these effects. Either they have transformed the grantee, transformed the affiliate itself, and or transformed the community. Today, we admire and celebrate these impactful grants that represent a slice of grant making being made by our affiliates across the country. Each awardee or the affiliate receives $500 to be used to either support the affiliate, or those funds can be passed on to the grantee. In addition, the affiliates honored today will receive national exposure on all Philanos communication platforms. Today, we will be recognizing 3 affiliates. But before we do that, I would like to thank the Spotlight Committee for their work and collaboration in determining these awardees. By design, the committee is composed of 2 Philanos board members and a representative from 4 affiliates. It was my great pleasure, and it was so much fun to work with these women. First is Deborah Majewski from Women's Impact Fund in Charlotte, North Carolina. And Deborah is the other board member that was on the committee. Terry Mumford from Impact 100, Greater Indianapolis. Jean Townsend from Impact Metro Denver. Christine DeCesar from Impact 100, Garden State, New Jersey. And Dale Clifford from Women's Giving Alliance in Florida. Our committee had the pleasure of reviewing many submissions, but also the challenging task of determining which ones would receive an award. For the selections, the committee used an equity and inclusion lens, as well as considering how the grants transform the grant-making organization, the nonprofit organization, or their community. Interestingly, within the lens of equity and transformational grant making, a large number of applicants focused on affordable housing. This pattern informed the committee that the issue of affordable housing is an issue of importance to many of our affiliates, and the committee chose to highlight the importance of housing issues through these awards. I am so excited to announce our awardee. Our first Spotlight Award goes to Baltimore Women's Giving Circle for their grant to Black Women Build Baltimore. Co-chairs Ann Daniel and Sally Ward are here to accept their award. Welcome, Ann and Sally.
Hello, thank you so much. This is very exciting to be here today. I really do appreciate it. As you said, my name is Ann Daniels, and I'm so pleased to be here today with my co-chair, Sally Ward, on behalf of the Baltimore Women's Giving Circle. And we are thrilled that Black Women Baltimore was chosen for a Spotlight Award this year. Thank you so much to Philanos. Shelley Halstead, the founder and executive director, could not be here today, but we do have a video of her talking about Black Women Build Baltimore, her reason for starting the organization, and for being in Baltimore. Though we are so glad to have Tanika Garibaldi, the program manager, with us today. So a little bit about the Baltimore Women's Giving Circle. We were founded in 2001 with 52 members, and today we have about 476. As you can see from this slide, we fund a broad array of programs. So as long as a program or an organization dovetails with our mission of supporting women and their families working towards self-sufficiency in the Baltimore area, they are eligible for funding, and we do fund operating as well as program support. If we could have the first video, please.
Welcome to the Baltimore Women's Giving Circle Grant Recommendation Day. It's a big day for those of us who have been involved in grants this year, and it's a wonderful day, so we hope you enjoy it.
The Baltimore Women's Giving Circle seeks to empower women and their families to achieve self-sufficiency. To do that, the Circle provides grants to organizations that provide support services to women and their families, including healthcare, housing, job training, after-school programs for kids, youth mentoring, just to name a few.
The grant experience is, as I said, is the reason I joined the Circle. The process requires you to tell each other about ourselves. We get to know what we care about. We get to know where our biases are. We get to know where we're lacking in knowledge and where we have expertise. So I would say I've made many friends in this circle. And there's a depth to the friendship that many other friendships don't have because of those shared interests.
While we were proud of the awards we have made, we are humbled and honored to be able to support the incredible work that other people do in Baltimore, like Shelley Halstead and Tanika Garibaldi and Black Women Build. Black women as a group own less property and have less ability to pass on wealth than almost any other group. And this innovative program starts by training Black women in the trades needed to rehabilitate vacant homes: carpentry, electrical, and plumbing. Working as a team and with volunteers, they renovate a house from demo to finish work. The participants build community with each other and with the neighborhood where the house is located. And ultimately, they own the houses they renovate. Having these particular skills enables them to make 2 or 3 times more in wages than traditionally female-centered jobs. So these women now have resources for other life-changing opportunities, and they have the skills to maintain that new home. Currently, there are 11 houses in the build process, 12 lots in the acquisition process, and 2 houses for sale. So next video, now you'll actually get to hear from Shelley.
My name's Shelley Halstead, and I'm the Executive Director of Black Women Build Baltimore. What inspired me to start Black Women Build Baltimore was that I have a skill set that could be well used as a carpenter. I came to Baltimore and I just saw that there was so much potential here in the buildings and the people. And so I really wanted to help Black women thrive. And in order to do that, what I felt I could do was rehab houses with them and turn them into homeowners. You know, I'd always been a carpenter. I'm a carpenter by trade. And so late in life, I had an epiphany where I was going to go to law school and, I don't know, sue employers for discrimination and harassment, because I endured a lot of that as a Black queer woman in the construction field. And then I worked in an office when I was done with law school, and I realized that that wasn't going to work for me. So I went back to carpentry. What law school gave me, or what I gleaned from law school, I guess, I became a better writer. So grant writing. It meant for some people that I was vetted in a certain way, basically a white collar, that I could jump through the hoops, and people found value in that I'm an attorney, that I'm barred in Maryland, but I'm just a carpenter. Baltimore is a great place to start Black Women Build Baltimore. It has the population I'm interested in working with. It has the houses that the cost isn't prohibitive. And I was on the East Coast. I had worked for a year in DC. You know, it could have been like Detroit or Philly or Cleveland or maybe Houston or, you know, like various places. But I had always romanticized Baltimore as this, you know, Black working class town, and, you know, super hard Scrabble, and it was just perfect. It was just perfect. And the area where I'm working, it's so historical. I mean, I know Baltimore is an historical place, but you know, Druid Heights, Upton, Marble Hill, that area, there were a lot of heavyweights that grew up here and spent their time here. And so it just felt, it was a very natural fit to come to Baltimore and start the project here. I think it's really important for Black women to learn how to maintain the asset, which is their home. You know, a lot of people buy houses and then they're house poor because they put all their money into a house. And when things break down or things need maintenance, they don't know how to do it. Right. And so labor is really expensive compared to materials, you know, depending on if you're doing high end stuff. But basically, labor is the most expensive thing. Right. So if you are able to do some of that labor, or you are able to understand the process that goes into that labor, so that nobody like takes your money or does a poor job, I think that's super important.
So I'm glad you got to hear this from Shelley. We do wish she could be here today, but thank you again to Philanos. We are so pleased that you have chosen to recognize her and her work and the community that she is working with in Baltimore. So congratulations also to the other nominees and awardees.
Thank you very much. We are so glad to be here to celebrate all of the Spotlight Award winners. So take care.
Congratulations, Anne, and we are so excited to be able to highlight your affiliate. And now our second Spotlight Award goes to Impact Oklahoma for their grant to Pivot and their Tiny Home Initiative. Communications Chair Anna Young is here to accept their award. Welcome, Anna.
A nonprofit is adding 20 new tiny homes to their campus in Northeast Oklahoma City.
The CEO of Pivot says the homes will help teens and young adults facing homelessness. News 9's Barry Mangold went to the grand opening and shows us how they'll make an immediate impact.
This village of tiny homes took, well, a village to build.
It's been a long road, but I always say this is a community that's been built by a community.
Jennifer Goodrich, the CEO of Pivot, says the homes will help people under 25 who are facing life challenges, including the roughly 50 18-year-olds who age out of foster care every year in the metro.
It's safe and stable housing, transitional living housing for young people that are living in our community that don't have other options.
A city survey found that on any given night in OKC, there are more than 100 people under the age of 25 experiencing homelessness. Experts say it comes down to options.
The thing that drives Oklahoma City's homeless population more than anything else is just the availability of truly affordable housing.
Pivot's tiny homes rent for a max of $150 a month. The goal? Help folks practice living a healthy, independent lifestyle.
A lot of the young people that we serve have experienced a lot of layers of trauma, giving them that safe space so that they are able to work through that to be successful.
Beyond the unique designs and layouts, the developer of this village says tiny homes could help solve big problems. In fact, Oklahoma City's mayor says these could help with homelessness or affordable housing.
Something like this may also make sense for adults or veterans, that are also have faced incredible challenges throughout their life, but they're going to need more than just tiny homes. I mean, you have to have a thoughtful nonprofit that's providing probably a lot of wraparound services.
If we could, as a city, decide to make it legal to build accessory dwelling units in backyards all throughout our city, throughout our metro, it would be overnight. We would start seeing really great housing opportunities.
Barry Mangold, Oklahoma's Own, News 9.
Thank you so much for having me. Impact Oklahoma began in 2003 on a girls' weekend trip. Our founder, Paige Beatty, told her friends about a magazine article she'd read regarding the first impact group in Cincinnati, and her friends rallied behind her, pooling their money to give out grants to Central Oklahoma nonprofits. Since 2005, we've given away nearly $4 million, including 32 $100,000 grants in the area of family, health and wellness, education, community, and arts and culture. Our goal is to reach 500 members so we can give out $100,000 grants to each service area every year. We are close to halfway to our goal and always looking to recruit new members who want to help make a difference and have fun doing it. I am honored to present Pivot, a Turning Point for Youth, as our Spotlight Award recipient. They won our grant in 2018, just 4 short years ago, and they have absolutely thrived. 50 years ago, Pivot started as Youth Services for Oklahoma County, with the chief aim to provide counseling services for youth involved in the criminal justice system. As needs grew, services and programs multiplied to now include a counseling center, community intervention center in partnership with local law enforcement, a DHS licensed shelter, an emergency shelter, and a medical clinic. They saw a critical need for housing, so they came up with their tiny home initiative, intended for foster children aging out of the system to have a safe place to land, close to the aforementioned services. Not only did our $100,000 grant fund the first 3 tiny homes, it gave legitimacy and visibility to this project, and soon architects, builders, and interior designers offered their resources to add even more homes, magnifying our initial investment. We were the spark that ignited the change. You can see on the slide the timeline and how quickly everything came together. What started as a test program of 3 tiny homes blossomed into a community of 26, 280 to 320 square foot, fully furnished homes outfitted with beds, kitchens, and bathrooms. These safe transitional living spaces for residents, primarily aged 16 to 24, are for those who have no place to live and would otherwise be homeless or couch surfing. Each home is unique, and many have been designed by architecture students from Oklahoma State University. The Hobbit House, covered in AstroTurf, is a crowd favorite. All residents go through a variety of assessments for their potential service needs, which may include healthcare, mental health services, substance use treatment, education, and employment. By providing housing stability, residents can focus on improving other areas of their lives, knowing that they have a safe place to rest their heads at night. The program has already been a massive success, with 5 residents already moving on, despite COVID nonetheless. 1 to a rent house, 1 to an apartment, 1 to the military, and 2 to college. Local developers have offered their services in helping to properly plat the property, and there is now space for as many as 86 tiny homes. We look forward to seeing what the future holds, and thank you for this grant.
Congratulations, Anna, to Oklahoma and to Pivot. What an incredible program. We're so excited that you are a Spotlight awardee. And finally, our 3rd Spotlight Award goes to the Spirit of St. Louis Women's Fund, their grant to Dream Builders for Equity. Gwen Wesley is here to accept their award. Welcome, Gwen. Please share with us about your organization. You are here. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for this recognition. Thank you, Ellen. Good afternoon. I am Gwen Wesley, a founding member and a past president of the Spirit of St. Louis Women's Fund. I'm so honored to receive the Spotlight Award on behalf of our organization. We were founded in 2006 by Shelby Shagrin and Susan Block and began granting in 2007. Our 200 members represent a diverse population who reside in the St. Louis metropolitan region, which includes counties in Illinois. We grant in 5 areas: arts and culture, education, health, environment, and social services. And our grants are not limited to a specific gender. We are an all-volunteer organization and are very appreciative of the support provided by the St. Louis Community Foundation for our grant and membership management. Since 2007, we have invested $3.1 million in our communities through 91 fantastic not-for-profits. The one that you'll be hearing about today is one of the ones that we're talking about. It is called Dream Builders for Equity, and their mission is working to develop economically sustainable and socially engaged communities by growing equity for youth, businesses, residents, and real estate. Dream Builders for Equity tackles the vacant home epidemic plaguing the St. Louis region. They employ local minority, youth, and contractors to do large-scale community-led development projects. This approach puts money and equity back into the pockets of the people within the community while developing skills that increase opportunity for employment and encourage minority-owned business development. Dream Builders ensures their development efforts protect against the displacement of current residents by providing renovations for seniors and grant support for property tax increases that disproportionately affect minority residents. While employed and participating in the Summer Academy and Apprentice program, historically underserved youth, and we're talking about those ages 16 through 24, develop the skills needed to succeed academically and professionally. The participants learn multiple skills for future employment and entrepreneurship, rehab and sell vacant local properties, renovate senior citizens' homes, earn income at $10 to $15 per hour, sell the newly rehabbed properties to first-time home buyers, and receive a percentage of property sales and scholarship funds, and they make additional money from their book sales. In 2021, Dream Builders received a $25,000 grant from the Spirit of St. Louis Women's Fund. Funds were used to support year 1 of their Hyde Park project. Since receiving that grant, Dream Builders announced receipt of a 5-year, $1 million anonymous grant that is helping the nonprofit bring more training, development, and economically sustainable solutions to North St. Louis City. The unrestricted grant will have an enormous impact on boosting Dream Builders' ability to expand its reach and depth across the St. Louis region. SOS celebrates their success, we share their vision, and we applaud their ongoing commitment to the St. Louis community. Now let's take a look at Dream Builders.
3 years ago, our founders had a dream to mentor, educate, and employ equitable opportunities foundational for youth to realize their fullest potential.
Like me.
Like me.
Like me.
Through the Dream Builders Academy,
Together.
we envision a world where all communities dare to dream, the skills to build, and the resources to own our future. Dream Builders centers youth to grow as future community development leaders and entrepreneurs. What next? What next?
Our 5-year plan, an investment of $800,000, reinvested for the next 5 years.
We can create $835,000 in youth wealth, build $4 million in minority contractors revenue, raise $375,000 in scholarship funds, grow Dream Builders Academy graduates by 250 students, earn $360,000 in youth employment.
1 in 5 homes in North St. Louis are vacant.
In 5 years, we can create 25 new homeowners, rehab 25 vacant homes, and grow social equity through 25 beautification projects.
We envision raising $800,000 this year and investing it back
At the start of each year for the next 5 years.
Together, with your support, we can
Dream,
build, own.
Building social equity
Through financial equity
for North St. Louis communities.
Thank you so much for this recognition. And we are so proud of Dream Builders for Equity.
Thank you, Gwen. And Philanos is so proud of SOS and Dream Builders for Equity, as we are all of the Spotlight awardees. Congratulations to you all. And a special thank you to all of you all the affiliates that submitted a nomination for the Spotlight Award. We are so proud of all of the work that our affiliates are doing to support their local communities. And as Maggie mentioned at the beginning of our time together, the next Philanos conference will be held in Baltimore in the fall of 2023, which is very, very exciting that we'll all be together. We encourage all affiliates to nominate one of your grantees for the next round of the Spotlight Awards, and stay tuned for details for the fall conference and the next round of Spotlight Awards. We are not yet finished with this award ceremony. We have one more special award to be given. I would like to introduce Laura Midgley, Chair of the Willoughby Award Committee. Laura, take it away.
Thank you, Ellen. It's wonderful to be here, and congratulations to all the Spotlight awardees. Your programs and organizations are truly inspirational. It's wonderful to hear about them. My name is Laura Midgley, and I had the pleasure of chairing the selection committee for the Willoughby Award this year, as well as last. It's particularly rewarding to be involved, having been a part of the founding team of Philanos and a close colleague of Colleen Willoughby's over 20 years. We are so pleased, Colleen, you can join us this year, and we get to sit side by side in presenting this award. I will first talk about the origins of the award, and then Colleen is here to present it. So first, I'd like to thank the committee members who were part of our team that selected the Willoughby finalists and the Willoughby awardee. They are Holly Lee from the Asian Women's Giving Circle, Stephanie Cook from the San Diego Women's Foundation, and Virginia Mills of Giving Women in Minneapolis. I thank you for your thoughtful consideration of our terrific nominees. And I would also like a shout out to all of the nominators for your effort it took to bring to light the inspirational group of women that we were able to consider. So thank you to everybody. Last year, we were still struggling with being together during the pandemic. So it is special that many of us can be gathered in our rooms together, and I get to sit here side by side with Colleen. Before we get to that announcement, which Colleen will present, I'd like to give some background on this prestigious award. We announced it in February 2020 in honor of Colleen's leadership at our last in-person conference in Seattle. That event aligned with the 25th anniversary of the Washington Women's Foundation, which Colleen also founded. And it was the perfect opportunity to honor her while she was surrounded by her local and national communities as we gathered for the conference. Many of you were there. And we celebrated with us when we even danced in that celebration with joyfulness as our and love as our morning speaker spoke about. That's an important part of our philanthropy is that giving back in love and joy. Philanos created the Willoughby Award to reflect Colleen's lifelong commitment to women's civic and philanthropic leadership. Our award is designed to recognize a woman who uses her leadership to challenge the status quo in her community, as Colleen did in 1995, when she created a new model of philanthropy called Women's Collective Giving Grantmaking. One of the inequities at that time meant that women had yet to realize their full potential as community leaders, despite having new economic power as high earners. 27 years later, we are grateful so many women step up as change makers, bridge builders in philanthropy, this time to address racial, education, and economic systemic inequities of our time. Next slide. Before we highlight the finalists and announce the winner, I want to play this audio recording, which illuminates Colleen's journey as a change maker and gives insight into the spirit of this award. This recording was first showcased at that Seattle conference in 2020, when we gave this award to Colleen. The award, of course, is that we are acknowledging future leaders from here on. So let's play
in high school,
that audio.
When attending Girls Nation in Washington, D.C., and when I sat down in the Senate chair of Margaret Chase Smith, the first woman to become a United States Senator, I've had an abiding interest in public service and a profound respect for women's effective civic leadership. I've spent nearly a lifetime finding ways to develop mechanisms for others to meaningfully engage for the benefit of the commonweal. Establishing the Washington Women's Foundation and nurturing the formation of other collective grant-making organizations in the United States and around the globe are chapters in this ongoing journey. We're all a part of an amazing collective philanthropy network. Over 70 affiliate groups, giving, learning, leading together. If we reflect on how we got here, the women's movement of the 1970s helped pave the way for us and for a new breed of energy and activism, women collective philanthropy. The women's movement highlighted issues of inequality and separateness, challenging us still today. I think of DEI in 2020. Back then, we aimed to address the challenges by first getting women a seat at the table as major donors. And in the past 50 years, women's access to wealth has grown dramatically thanks to increased education, independence, and employment opportunities. By 1990, women emerged into new forms of power and opportunity for generating, investing, and gifting wealth. 25 years ago, 5 women, Faye Sarkowski, Sue Lyle Hunter, Rhoda Altum, Ann Farrell, and I, founded the Washington Women's Foundation after decades of community service and volunteerism and leaders of nonprofit organizations. We knew, as you do too, the demands of community building are continuous and growing and expensive. We knew that time and talent will only go so far. We needed a way to get big money into the hands of innovative problem solvers to truly make a difference. We wanted to create a new kind of collective philanthropy that served to elevate women, to educate, to inspire, and to empower women to serve not just women and girls, but whole communities. After all, every issue is a women's issue. And so, the Washington Women's Foundation was established. And so, too, grew a network of energized women to build new pools of major money to provide education and hands-on experience in grant-making, efforts in philanthropy, build bonds among donors who are inclusive of ideas and backgrounds to make significant and lasting differences in our communities. Today, women are more confident than ever, with enormous potential and capacity for collective contribution. New challenges face us every day, and we must not be deterred. Our society demands that each one of us do our part. We must continue to lead and to act in bold ways. Democracy depends on all of us to contribute to the greater good. Together, we can and we must address the pressing issues of our time. As Melinda Gates has reminded us, our greatest challenge is to reduce the inequities that divide our world. Be confident, think smart, act big.
I think those words are just as appropriate today as they were when they were recorded in 2020. Next slide, please. This award recognizes the leaders who have acted differently by expanding the vision and voices, by being intentional about including the community's knowledge, and by collaborating and partnering with their communities, and by working towards a more inclusive philanthropic approach. In reviewing nominees for the award, the selection committee considered how the nominees' collaborative styles of leadership and inclusion of undervalued voices and points of view led to better outcomes in their communities. Last year, we awarded the first Willoughby to Kyle Ruffin of Impact 100 South Jersey for her vision on how her community in New Jersey could better collaborate, listen, and most importantly, act to include unheard voices in philanthropy. Next slide. This year, the Willoughby Award Committee received nominations from affiliates across the country. I'd like to thank all the nominators who took the time to recognize women in their organizations and congratulate all the nominees. Their organizations are represented on this slide. The committee thoroughly enjoyed the opportunity to get to know all of them. We had a difficult choice, but ultimately we selected 3 finalists. Our first finalist is Catherine Fulton, a member of Impact 100 Sonoma in California. She began her career as a journalist and then pivoted to a second career as a consultant who guided philanthropy through big picture thinking. As she transitioned away from full-time work to local philanthropy in Sonoma County, she became a major force in helping her community cope with the last few years of the pandemic. Her response was to establish the multi-million-dollar Catalyst Fund, which she says was the most rewarding work she has ever done, which is considerable given her long career in philanthropy. Prior to this, she collaborated on an analysis of the Sonoma County philanthropic and nonprofit landscape called Hidden in Plain Sight. This report examined how stakeholders could come together and more effectively deal with the critical issues of affordable housing, poverty, and aging across different populations of Sonoma County. Since then, her community has been ravaged by 2 devastating fires, and that report was put to use and applied to laying groundwork for a more effective recovery, one that required better collaboration. This insightful report also helped Impact 100 Sonoma, and the region's other funders and nonprofits simplify and make their grant making more effective. Through a better understanding of place-based services, people and organizations began to act differently. Catherine has applied many of the principles of trust-based philanthropy, as Kaci outlined, truth, strength, decision, strategic disruption, and love, to grant making decades before it was a term or a trend by being collaborative, nimble, responsive, and community-based. Our second nominee, our second finalist, is Margot Greenfield of Impact 100 Essex. She was nominated, whoops, I've lost that part. Thank you for her nomination. Margot is the founder of Impact 100 Essex in New Jersey and was determined to build an organization that reflected her values of collaborative decision-making and leadership and centered on community connections. As our country responded to George Floyd's killing, Margot created the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Action Committee and developed impact equity grants to better support BIPOC-led organizations with small and responsive support. She has also helped lead Impact's establishment of the Every Voice Fellowship, which expanded membership and opportunities to grantees, leadership, and staff. That, of course, reflects much of what we heard about today from Kaci and Pia. Spurred by attending the Seattle Philanos conference, where attendees also heard from Pia, one of our morning speaker, if you weren't able to participate, she dove into trust-based philanthropy to better understand and combat the application of implicit bias in philanthropy. Our third finalist is Louisa Moats of the Wood River Women's Foundation in Ketchum, Idaho. She was nominated by Gail Landis. As a lifelong educator and national expert in the science of learning, she works to create more effective reading programs and teachers, particularly across systems that perpetuate the unacceptable learning gap between white students and students of color. Locally, Louisa has been instrumental in the Wood River Women's Foundation's adoption of the Focus Grant Pilot, which for each of 2 years invests $100,000 in a systemic issue. Thanks to Louisa's commitment to thoughtfully engage the community to learn about their needs, as well as to educate her fellow board members and the Women's Foundation's membership, they voted to establish the new grant for the creation of the Wood River Early Learning Collaborative. The Women's Foundation's new approach to grant making, which moves towards matching the investment with the significance of the goal, is designed to be more strategic, collaborative, inclusive, accountable, and responsive than the traditional core pooled fund grants. Again, congratulations to all 3 finalists, and thank you all for your tremendous leadership. We are now ready to announce the 2022 awardee. So I'd like to turn things over to Colleen, who gets to make that exciting announcement. Are you ready?
Not quite, Laura.
We can start right.
No, I know. I'm thanking you, Laura, for your preliminary remarks about these wonderful women that are a part of this award. Having sat here with you in your lovely office, listening to this whole program today, I am humbled and thrilled at the growth of the women's movement and what has been accomplished by this organization that I was just a very small part of in the very beginning over 25 years ago. My little heart is just pumping, and thank you for allowing me to sit with you for this presentation. First of all, I'd like to congratulate all of the nominees and finalists for this award. We have all been happy campers in this important work together. Today, however, it is my pleasure and a real joy to be able to honor Catherine Fulton of Impact 100 Sonoma, this year's award winner for the Willoughby Award. Congratulations, Catherine. Catherine and I have been in these eventful trenches for a long while, and a joy they have been. Catherine, your leadership has been exceptional over these past 20 plus years, and I'm especially pleased to be able to present this award to you today. I'm holding your book. Does it show?
I'm holding your book,
A little higher.
looking
There we
out
go.
for the future.
Oh my God, look at that. Yeah, I'm gonna put it in front of my face.
I actually have two. This is my pure copy. My other one is written in extensively with papers and things, but I thought I would show you the perfect copy. I'm looking at your book published in 2005 for all to see. And from the response that we've heard on this end, I know that some of you have recognized it. This is my clean copy, as I've said. I have another at home that's dog-eared, full of notes on my desk and in my office. Again, at today's meeting, congratulations, Catherine, and sincere hope for your future going forward. I know everyone wants to hear from you, Catherine, but first, we must let you know that you will receive $1,000 donation from Philanos to be directed to the nonprofit of your choosing. In addition, there are many of your local Sonoma members gathered with you now at Lancaster's house. We've asked your colleagues to present you with something from Philanos to help you celebrate. Lynn, are you there?
Oh my. Yes, we actually have a board member here from Philanos. Anne Marie McGee is going to present a present from Philanos to Catherine.
Oh my. And Catherine, on behalf of Philanos, we're so excited to share this beautiful vase with it's you. Beautiful. The etched leaves, for people that can't see, signify all the growth that you've provided for philanthropy here and across the nation. Oh, Thank you so beautiful. much. Oh, that's so nice. Thank you for that. Do I have to talk now?
Yes, please, Catherine. We'd love to hear from you.
The first thing I want to say is it's an unbelievable honor to be. I just am incredibly honored, Colleen, to have an award.
This is take two of trying to accept the Colleen Willoughby Award. The audio was not working, so I am going to say what I would say to Colleen and to Philanos and to my dear friends here. Colleen, I am so honored to accept this award that is named after you, because your example is truly inspirational. I first met you about 20 years ago, and you were, among other things, not just inspiring the people at the conferences we were at, but you visited Roanoke, Virginia, where was my original hometown, and helped them start a women's foundation there that my mother was part of, who was my role model and example for philanthropy. You are a visionary because what you have done is show the power of widening circles of impact and care. You started as a volunteer, then you moved to starting the Women's Foundation, the collective giving movement, and ultimately has become Philanos. And I think all of us are called now to step into widening circles of impact and care, because it's very limited what we can do as individuals. We live in a very complex world in which the only way forward is going to be to have shared responsibility and to enable collective action. And that's what we tried to do here in Sonoma when the pandemic hit. We gathered leaders of all the philanthropic organizations, including Impact 100, and we said, we have to do the extra that's on top of what we're all doing, because the pandemic is extra. And we did that together. Our informal slogan became the power of we. And we learned that day in and day out, week in and week out, month after month, because we learned that if we listened to the people who were living the problems and that were on the front lines, they, as we heard today, it was incomparable what they knew. We could then sit in groups and we could look at the whole and see the whole in a way that no individual organization or donor could ever do. So we could come together and do something that no one could do alone. And so it is to me the DNA of Philanos and of the collective giving movement altogether, to be about cooperation and generosity. And I have always believed what my mother taught me, which is when in doubt, be generous. And therefore, I am very moved by your generosity in honoring not just me, but all the people I'm sitting with in this room, who are the reason that we were able to do anything in Sonoma. It's not about me. I did help start it, but it was never possible without the power of we, which is what this movement is about. And Colleen, what you set in motion. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
So in closing, I'd like to congratulate Catherine Fulton of Sonoma, and kudos to our 3 Spotlight Award recipients from affiliates in Baltimore, in Oklahoma, and St. Louis, along with all our nominees. It's heartwarming to see so much good work by women in this particular network. It was also a very special moment to have Colleen Willoughby with us today. I remember back to my early days in collective giving in 2008. As a new member of Greenville Women Giving, I attended an event at the BMW Zentrum plant, jointly sponsored by Greenville Women Giving and Women Giving from Spartanburg. Our guest speaker that evening was Colleen Willoughby. She spoke about the new network she and others were founding, the Women's Collective Giving Grant-Making Network, now Philanos. Greenville Women Giving was quick to join, and one of our founders, Sue Priester, soon joined the WCGN board. Sue still moderates many of our webinars to this day. Colleen has been the impetus for so many women to claim their seat at the table and better their own communities. As Laura said, it's so exciting to see the next generation of women leaders working to put their mark on change for the future. Today's conversation on trust-based philanthropy was all about that new direction. And quickly now, before we go, I'd like you to take a look at what's coming up for you at Philanos. On November 8th, we will have a webinar at noon Eastern, and the topic is Funding Women and Girls. Speaking is Jeannie Sager, Director of the Women's Philanthropy Institute, and Christina Gordon, co-founder and CEO of the Women's Foundation of Boston. On November 16th, Comms Club will meet at noon Eastern, and it will be a deep dive into social media. Our Comms Club is a place for communications teams at our affiliates to share and learn from one another and from our Philanos communications crew. Last, but far from least, please save that date for our next in-person national conference in Baltimore, Maryland, November 5 through 7 of 2023. More details will be coming very soon. Goodbye, and thank you for joining us today. And congratulations again to all our awardees.